So we'll start by setting our motivation. So I think of the purpose of the course being deeply familiarizing our mind with the Buddha's teachings, those of the Sutra path contained in the Lamrim, the method explained by the Buddha for going in a logical, step-by-step manner to transform the mind, to gain the insights, the realizations that the Buddha himself had that transformed his mind from completely ordinary, confused mind like ours into one of perfect clarity, omniscience, perfect wisdom, perfect compassion, perfect love. We develop the wish to follow that path and attain that result, not for our benefit, but in order to be of benefit, to be able to use that state to liberate countless sentient beings, to show the path to awakening like the Buddha did. So we develop those minds of confidence, refuge, and bodhicitta as our motivation. All right. So we're continuing on the refuge section. Would anyone like to ask a question from prior material on the refuge section? So we are starting now with day 152. The quotation is, "Through right understanding, we take the right path and thus attain the right result." And in a way, this contemplation, some of the upcoming contemplations are looking at the refuge vows and commitments that are part of the training in refuge. And in a way, that's kind of what this contemplation is doing. Maybe not directly, or I don't know, maybe not even intentionally, but we can talk about it in that context, because what Lama Zopa goes on to further explain is that choosing, and of course, taking refuge is something only appropriate for Buddhists. People can certainly study, Buddhism in general. People can get incredible benefits from learning to meditate, from focusing on love and compassion and patience and so on. In general ways, refuge is meant for people who actually want to become Buddhist, so it's a further step. And of course, the Lamrim too, I think, is a further step as compared to just those contemplations on love and compassion and so forth, because there's no um, the whole point of the Lamrim is enlightenment, whereas a person might use other aspects of Buddhism, like just the technology of meditation and positive mental states in general, to enhance some other philosophical or religious system, and that's entirely valid. Um, but the training on refuge is reserved for those who are contemplating becoming Buddhist, who are deepening their commitment to being Buddhist. So, in that context, Lama Zopa is pointing out that from the Buddhist perspective, um, the only philosophical system that we have on our planet that results in enlightenment was taught by the Buddha. There's no other philosophical system that can bring that result about. If a person engages in virtuous conduct, if they try to avoid non-virtuous conduct, kind of the general things that you find in perhaps not any number of philosophical or religious systems, that is beneficial, and there's value in that, but it leads to higher rebirth. It doesn't, in and of itself, it doesn't lead to liberation. Um, so, in that sense, what Lama Zopa is talking about here is the importance of turning to the right source of refuge. And I mentioned the commitments because one of the vows and commitments of a person who has taken refuge is to not put other sources of refuge above their refuge in the Buddha. There's an actual commitment not to kind of be too, Lama Zopa here says, being like two-minded about it, being like, well, yes, I'm a Christian, but also I'm a Buddhist. Like that doesn't ultimately work. You can be a Christian who incorporates Buddhist ideas, um, but to say that you want to go to heaven and you also want to achieve enlightenment, those are contradictory views and they don't really work together. Um, so, as someone who's taken refuge, there's a commitment not to think that all we need to do is confess to a creator being, and the creator being will or worship a creator being, and then we'll be taken care of. We will be. It's a very different system. It's a very different way of thinking about what we actually need to do. It doesn't, of course, those systems also encourage virtuous action and the avoiding of non-virtuous action, but the model is very different. The idea is that it is sort of the grace of the creator that saves a person from eternal suffering and installs them in eternal bliss. And so it's a very kind of clashing sort of system. So for a person who is thinking of or has taken, actual refuge, then there needs to be a greater sense of clarity in the mind of that person about what system, what philosophical ideas, what methods they are actually relying on, um, so that there isn't that split. Because, again, from the Buddhist perspective, there is no such thing as an eternal heaven. There are heavenly realms, and the lifetimes that exist in those realms are extraordinarily long, but they come to an end. And then the cycle continues in ways that are less pleasant than that. And so, um, if we, so it's just, to think about, what do I believe, what does make sense to me, and then being clear and convicted in what methodology a person is choosing, and not to kind of mix those two, any two kind of um, contradictory views about what actually does protect us, what actually does hold us back from suffering. Is it the grace of an omniscient creator being, or is it the karmic tendencies and habits that we are establishing in our own mind through our own effort? Those are just two approaches, and they're not complementary. Uh, okay. Any thoughts or questions about that contemplation? Okay, so day 153, the quotation from Lama Yeshe is, taking refuge means that Dharma wisdom is always with us. So here he's kind of talking about the difference between sort of ritual um, and inner, inner true uh, refuge. Like, not, it isn't saying the words, it isn't engaging in some sort of ceremony, it isn't, um, doing water bowls or lighting incense or engaging in any particular kind of Eastern sort of external ritual. He's talking about um, what is it that we think that we rely on? What is it that we find is reliable? What is it that really can hold us back from suffering? And if we have that clear in our minds, then we don't need to engage in any particular external ritual or expression of going for refuge in a kind of public way, like making a big production of going to church on Sunday, or like they do, like when people get all dressed up and they, it's kind of a social thing, and that happens in the East too. It's sort of a big production when you go to the temple, and you bring all kinds of offerings, and you make, and Lama Yeshe is saying we don't need to try to copy that sort of making a big production of it. What is critical is where we turn in our own mind to protection. What seems to us to be reliable? What is it that has the power, the capacity to hold us back from suffering? And where, when we get stressed, when we get anxious, when we get, where do we turn? What do we turn toward? What arises in the mind as a source of refuge, as a source of protection? Um, and once we have that really internally, really clear, which is, again, the vows and the commitments and all, it's a training. And so it isn't to say that on the first day that a person takes refuge, that all of that is there in its final form. Um, we train in refuge over time, and refuge deepens over time. But Lama Yeshe is just pointing out that we can't, say, oh, that person's really renounced, or they have great refuge, or based on some sort of external sign or ritual, or it's what is genuinely present in our minds, and where we look to protection. He says, what we need to recognize is our Buddha potential and rely on that inner wisdom to stop the problems of everyday life. We should understand that we can deal with problems through meditation, intellectual thought, and enacting the six perfections. From my point of view, he says that kind of thing is good enough. If we are really taking refuge, we don't even need to say the word Buddha. The important thing, he says, in taking refuge is to understand that by doing so, we can solve the problems of everyday life by relying on the Buddha's wisdom, which we can call our own activated wisdom. By relying on the Buddha's wisdom with confidence and trust, we can liberate ourselves from suffering and confusion. Yes, Aaron.
I had a quick question about realization. So we're supposed to look for a guru or a teacher who has realizations. How would we do that? How does this connect to that?
So in general, of course, if we go back to the section on guru devotion, there are the 10, when we're looking for someone to relate to as a guru, we try to analyze using our best, our best way of understanding whether they embody the 10 qualities of a perfect, a highest level guide. And all of that is challenging because, in the sense that they aren't going to announce, oh, I have, when it says, pacified, thoroughly pacified, and meaning, that they're really incredibly ethical and they have insight into emptiness and, all of these things that constitute the best. And of course, they say, if you can't find the person with the 10 qualities, then your 7 qualities, and if you don't find the 7 qualities, then at least 3 qualities. And um, so we're just trying to do our best to find the most qualified person that we can, but also not only that, but the most qualified person that is suitable to move our mind, because there's many highly realized people, and you might, or highly advanced, or in positions of high authority, etc. And they might teach in a way that you don't connect with. They might, some people are quite dry, quite, kind of point by point. They teach, when they teach a text, they literally kind of go sentence by sentence through the entire text, explaining this word and that word. And other people will tell stories and they'll tell anecdotes, and it's more lively. They might laugh, a lot more. They might be more animated. And one style or another style might move your mind better than, and that has nothing to do with their realizations, with their knowledge. That's just how they're manifesting to reach particular kinds of students. So students have different propensities, and so teachers express different, manifest in different ways to reach students of different qualities or different, propensities. How to know? I mean, there isn't really a way to be sure that any person has any direct non-conceptual, death and impermanence, uh, insight into emptiness, of course. I mean, any of the, ideally, you want to find someone that you can feel confident about. Um, so, but it really just comes from looking, from taking teachings from them. And, but I would say that the main thing is, because a person can have more, of course, a person can have more than one teacher. Um, so the main thing is, does this person, are they explaining things in a way that I relate to, that it's going, that, when I ask them questions, is the feedback helpful? Do I find it supportive? Um, and because it's kind of like, can I make progress in working with this person? By entering into a relationship with this person, will that be productive for me? Will I be able to? So we have to research, ask questions about their their old, their senior students, like ask them what their experience is in working with them, check their reputation, as best we can, who has given them authority to do, are they a lineage Lama, who gave them, what is that lineage, who were their teachers, what endorsements or levels of authority have they received from their teachers, um, how long have they been doing that? Is it quite new? Are they quite young and there's, or do they have a long track record in being an abbot, or, having centers, or, doing different things. Um, but yeah, I mean, there isn't a foolproof way, because they shouldn't really say, I've realized this or that, or so there isn't a way. And people, that's why people make mistakes from time to time, because it is difficult. It's not a clear cut thing. People follow teachers, and then, you know, um, there are harmful things that seem to happen from time to time, because um, outwardly it seemed like they had these qualities, but then, um, people weren't able to actually be benefited. Any other thoughts or questions? So day 154, Lama Zopa is now again, like I said, going back to this idea of vows and talking about how taking refuge is the basis for any of the vows, because all of the vehicles that we have that relate to vows are, again, they're reserved for people who are formally Buddhist. It doesn't make sense to take the lay vows, the bodhisattva vows, the one day vows, the tantric vows. None of that makes any logical sense unless a person is engaging in kind of the whole system, and they are working toward achieving enlightenment. Of course, he says, that it's been many, all of the other major religious traditions encourage people in various ways to not kill, to not steal, and so on. And that's wonderful. And um, even a person can look at the lay vows, and, even not having taken them, can kind of live as if they have taken them. And that's a really useful thing to do, particularly if you're contemplating taking them at some point, to make sure that you can follow them, prior to actually formally adopting them, to kind of live. They recommend that if a person's, for example, taking ordination, that they be celibate for, a year, maybe 2 years prior to the taking of the ordination vow, because that's kind of the one thing that trips people up, is, wanting to, deciding that they actually do want to go back into a relationship. And um, so you want to get clarity on that before, it's it's actually real. Because if you're going to take it, then you've got 20, 30, 40 years of celibacy ahead of you. So what's one more? What's, just to kind of be clear on that's going to actually work out for you. So, um, so this is kind of saying that all of the vows that we might take or will take, they're all reserved for people who hold the refuge vows. Um, and and that there is an understanding in Buddhism that we've talked about before, that there's an additional power to living in the actual vow rather than just sort of thinking, well, that's a good thing to do, or I'll try. Of course, like we've also said, we make mistakes with regard to the vows, and then we just purify those mistakes, and we try to avoid committing that mistake again in the future. And even for just, like Geshe Zopa was saying, when we engage in that resolve, in the power of resolve in formal purification practice, it always has a time limit. It's because it's a training. Again, it's another vehicle for training. So um, we want to think about, we don't want to always say, or think in the context of the purification practice, oh, I'll never, ever, ever, kill another fly. Because probably we will, maybe we might, if we find them really, or like some bug that we find really aversive, or, that aversion is so strong, we might find it difficult. And so if we overestimate that, then we're kind of not being honest to, the refuge field, the merit field, the Dharmakaya mind that we're making that vow in relation to. So it's better to be like, well, for the next day, I'll really make a very, very strong effort to avoid. Or if we raise our voice at someone, well, we're going to raise our voice again at someone in the future. It's silly to think that we're going to go 40 years without raising our voice again. But we can go, an hour, we can go 2 hours, and really, really watch our speech, in a deep way. So we just want to be realistic when we engage in that power of restraint. But then we build on those habits. The idea isn't that we are limited or powerless or defect, that we want to build on that, but it's just that we build on that gradually, logically, over time, instead of saying things that are not true, that are too grandiose, and that, because it's impossible to even really observe our body, speech, and mind for that period. The idea is that when you make that time limited commitment, you're really watching your speech and your body and your mind for however long you've said it, and that takes effort and discipline. And so he's pointing out that after you take, and when you're living in a vow not to kill and so on, that there's a benefit to that, even when you're not presented with opportunities to kill. Whereas if you haven't taken that vow, but you generally think that not killing is good, then each time you're presented with an opportunity to not kill and you refrain from killing, then there's some benefit in those moments, but there's no benefit the rest of the time. When you're not presented with, when you're not actually making that decision, you're not receiving. But when you've actually taken the vow not to kill, then your mind is receiving a karmic benefit when you're asleep, when there's nothing around you that you want to kill. But of course, like I said, if you take the vow and then you ignore the vow and you just keep on, you carry on killing all of the things that you want to kill, then that's actually probably worse than never having taken the vow not to kill. If we just totally abandon it and totally disregard it, again, we make mistakes, but we recognize those as mistakes. We purify them. We try to do better. That's very different than just, saying, oh, well, I did that for a month or a year, but now it's silly and I'm just going to pretend like I can kill, whatever I want. So he's just kind of pointing out that um, that there's an incredible benefit to living in vows, and that if we want to receive those benefits, then refuge is the foundation for being able to be benefited by the lay vows, bodhisattva vows. Yes, Aaron.
Is it possible to take additional precepts by ourselves, or do we need a preceptor? This is assuming after we taken refuge or taken bodhisattva vows.
So when you take refuge, once you've taken refuge in the actual ceremony, then typically, all five of I mean, it can be done in different ways. Sometimes they're not given the lay vows, the vow not, but I mean, usually, because technically they don't have to be given. The refuge commitments are different than the lay vows. So, having taken refuge, the refuge commitments are inherent in that. Um, the lay vows may or may not have been given at that time. I would say, if a person didn't take one or more of the five lay vows, it's better, then it's good to request those from a teacher, and actually formally commit to upholding them. And then once you've done it, then you can refresh your vows on your own. That's kind of what purification in a way is. You can, in the Guru Puja, for example, there's a section on renewing the vows, and even bodhisattva vows and tantric vows. Um, so, but when you say additional, do you mean like just things that are not typically found in the vows that you also want to commit to, or what do you mean?
Well, when I took refuge, I only got the precept to not kill, but I wanted the other four of the
Yeah, I
basically.
mean, I would say that it's good to request taking them from, but then of course, like we've said, you can you have to regard that person as one of your teachers. So you don't want to just pick any random person, because then once you hear, if they've embezzled something from somebody, you know, you still have to uphold the training in seeing them as a Buddha. Um, so when we take vows from people, it's quite serious. So you want to investigate that person. I would say I don't. I mean, of course, the real training is, from one's own heart, understanding why we would abstain from these things, and abstaining from them. Um, but I just don't. It's kind of a technical question as far as whether we can give ourselves the other refuge vows, whether there's a difference. Maybe a good question to ask Yeshe Sherab. But Any other? Because, I mean, in a way, like, because there's ways of breaking the vows from the root, because generally, like, our purification practice is sufficient to protect and restore our vows when they're damaged. Um, but, like, if you kill a human, you're no longer carrying the vow not to kill, and that's not up to you. You're just not anymore. Like, because it's just, so you have to retake that. And generally you have to retake it with a preceptor. So I'm just not sure.
Venerable, Aaron has.
Oh yeah, sorry, I was reading.
What would it look like to break the other lay precepts from the root?
So, with regard to, I'm not sure about taking intoxicants, because I mean, I suppose, yeah, I'm not, because with sexual misconduct, it's a fully consummated sexual act, um, that falls under the guidelines of, so it's either, with an inappropriate partner, meaning it's non-consensual, or it's, outside of the bounds of a monogamous relationship. So, like, if you hold hands with someone, maybe that's not great, but you can purify that. But if it's fully consummated, a fully consummated act, then you can't really say that you're holding that vow anymore. Um, with stealing, uh, really, with that, um, and it might depend. There could be a difference between, um, some of these. There could also be a difference between whether or not they can be repaired without retaking them, even if it's broken from the root. I know that, like, and it could depend too on whether it's the lay vows or the ordained vows, because I know. But with killing a human, I know that there's no way that you can, be said to be holding that vow anymore. The other ones, like with stealing, you can't kind of half steal anything. Like, either you've stolen it or you haven't. So, um, with that, the only thing with that is that if it's not really of any value, then if it is of such value that it can bring a legal repercussion, like even a fine, but any kind of legal repercussion in your jurisdiction, because that varies, country to country, um, then at that point we're really not meant to steal anything, because the vow itself is, do not take that which has not been freely given by someone who has the authority to give it. So even if something is kind of very little material value, it's still stealing, but you don't actually fully break the vow until it is of sufficient material value that some legal action can be taken against you. Then you've really, really broken it. Prior to that, it's just damaged. So stealing is stealing, but there are gradations about what actually really destroys the vow. Killing with lying, what again, we're meant to avoid all forms of deceit, but to lie about one's spiritual attainments is the most destructive. So to say that you've realized emptiness when you haven't, or to say that I mean, they really kind of mean that specifically, like talking about having realized voidness. But I would say it probably applies to, it doesn't apply to like, oh, I went on a, you know, I, I was in class last night when you weren't in class. Like, that's not good, but that's not the same as saying that you've realized emptiness, it's, and so killing, stealing, lying, sexual, yeah. So it's basically to lie about one's spiritual attainments, to steal something that can cause a legal repercussion, to engage in a fully consummated inappropriate sexual act. And then but again, with drinking, that I guess you would have to say, because the lines are pretty blurred with that one, because you may not necessarily have taken it in a really, really, really strict way. So could be that one drink doesn't give rise to a problem. But if you're, dancing naked in the streets, smashing cars, then I would say that's pretty clear, So, if you get really hammered, then you've probably, but with that one, I mean, I suspect, with that one, you can purify that on your own. You don't have to take it again. But because people, I mean, Buddhists, lay people are doing that. I mean, it's happening pretty regularly that people take that and then they drink too much, just kind of because they had a really strong habit and they thought, well, I'll just have one drink, and then there was peer pressure and, they just kind of, that's happening. So I think with some of those, individual purification is still sufficient. But if you murder someone, then I would talk to your teacher about that and see what to do. Because I don't know about that. I'm pretty sure you can't. So day 156, Lama Zopa is talking about the karmic benefits of engaging in refuge. He says, if the merit we create by taking refuge were to take physical form, the whole of space would be unable to accommodate it. The whole universe would be too small. In fact, all the countless universes would be too small. Here we're not talking about the benefits of the refuge vow we take with a Lama, but the everyday refuge we hold in our heart, our reliance on the Buddha, his teachings, and the spiritual community. Because that's the foundation for how anyone achieves enlightenment, I think, is the idea that without holding, refuge in our minds in a serious way, we won't achieve enlightenment. And by holding it in that way, that's the foundation of our ability to achieve enlightenment. And the benefits of enlightenment, of being a fully enlightened being, are limitless. Or, the benefit that we can bring to sentient beings is unending. There's no way of speaking about the benefits of enlightenment that overstate their value. That any way of conceiving of it is less than its actual value. And so since we're now moving in that direction, the spiritual energy of that is extraordinary. He says, with refuge, we can create merit anytime we want. It's all up to us, and we don't need luck for the conditions to be right. Meditating, studying, prostrating, making offerings, any practice we do with a mind of refuge will definitely bring a huge positive result. Unlike a regular crop, our harvest will be incalculable. It will be inconceivable happiness. So day 157, Lama Zopa is again talking about the benefits of refuge, and he says that our refuge is a strong protection from harm, whether the harm is inflicted on us by malevolent human beings or by animal spirits and the like. So that's just one of the, when you read the benefits of holding refuge in the mind, they say you'll be protected from harm. Interfering spirits or so on, that the karmic benefit of that is protective. Yep.
I know that, like, for example, like in the recommended like daily liturgies, there's a thing about sealing bodhicitta and sealing the virtues. Is that what this is talking about as well, or rather, what Lama Zopa, I'm sorry, was saying?
I think that might be related to sealing them with an understanding of emptiness. I think that generally is how that is what that is referring to, meaning that um, that we don't concretize. It's reminding us not to concretize our practice, to not to think of um, that oneself, the person going for refuge, is empty of inherent existence. That the refuge itself is empty of inherent existence, and it's just reminding us to bring whatever level of understanding we have of emptiness into the path, and to just recollect that the sentient beings that we're trying to benefit, they're empty of inherent existence. And it's usually, when they say sealing our practice, it's usually referring to bringing whatever level of understanding emptiness we have and relating it to our spiritual practice, so that we avoid concretizing things, even in a virtuous way, even thinking, because engaging in like Geshe Zopa was saying, when we're talking about the perfection of all of the six perfections, it only a fully enlightened being actually can really have the perfection of generosity and pay, because they've directly realized emptiness, and they can engage in an act of giving or an act of patience, while simultaneously directly perceiving that the person is empty of inherent existence. The act of generosity is empty of inherent existence. The person receiving the act of generosity is empty of inherent existence. Uh, so it's typically, in what I've seen, typically what that means. Day 158 again, talking about the benefits of refuge. Lama Zopa says, just remembering one object of refuge stops any chance of rebirth in the lower realms. He says, at the time of death, simply having strong refuge in and remembering somebody like the Buddha or one of the other Buddhas, such as Amitabha or Chenrezig, will save us from rebirth in the lower realms. Similarly, if we're dying, we can just remember a Dharma text, such as the Heart Sutra or the Vajrakuta Sutra, or a mantra. That too can save us from the lower realms, and taking refuge in a Sangha member, a person with attainments in whom we have strong faith, can also save us from the lower realms. In other words, simply having refuge in even one of the three rare sublime ones will make it impossible for us to suffer a lower rebirth. In this way, the three rare sublime ones are extremely powerful. That's how Lama Zopa likes to translate the three jewels of refuge. He likes to translate that as the three rare sublime ones. You find that in a lot of his books. So, and I think maybe we touched on that before. We were talking about death and, how there's all of these complicated kinds of things that we, trying to die with tantric visualization or engaging in self-generation or something at the time of, but what great masters have found is that refuge is what they can do, like, because they're the other things, the mind is sort of, they thought, oh well, I mean, maybe not like the greatest masters, but fairly highly accomplished practitioners, they kind of had plans to do those sorts of things, and then it sort of escaped them at the time of death because the pain was maybe too great, or um, the mind was just the dissolution of the mind was different, what was different than they had anticipated. But they could cause a strong sense of refuge through their lifelong refuge practice. They could give rise to a really, really deep sense of refuge. And that is, if when we are dying, if we can do that, then that's just as effective in terms of avoiding the lower realms, at least in terms of creating the karmic conditions to get another perfect human rebirth, is just as effective as those, more advanced practices that we might find are significantly more difficult when we're dealing with the actual arising of the dying process. He says, whether we are happy or miserable, we need to train our mind right now. If we wait until the time of death, it will be too late. It will be very difficult to remember anything. In order to have faith in the Buddha at that crucial time, we have to train in refuge now. We can't just hope that mind of refuge will arise by itself as we die. All right. Any thoughts or questions from today? Yep.
So when we're talking about refuge in this context, we're talking about the particular kind of like mental act, not the actual refuge ceremony, which is considered like actually taking refuge. Because one can do the mental act without the actual ceremony, but it's not the full. I don't know the right word there, actually. The full something.
So, I mean, in Buddhism, there's a, there is a place, there's a certain sense of, there's a place for the actual ceremony in terms of its value, and actually make, because you make a connection with a teacher. You make a karmic connection with the teacher, and they give you the vows and so on. um, it could be, I mean, it's possible, I'm not entirely sure, it's possible that it falls under the category of something that a person might be able to take. I don't know that a person can take it, like if they don't have access to a teacher, if they live in a place where there's just no, like if they could take it from a statue of the Buddha and think that they're receiving the vows. It's not, maybe that's possible, I'm not sure. um, but there's certainly that first moment of the vows being part of one's mental continuum happen at that time, prior to that. And then, but then for the rest of one's life, a person trains in refuge. Um, and so that ceremony, that first instance, is just, prior to that, none of those vows were part of that person's mental continuum. And then they formally entered into that person's mental continuum. And as long as the vows are upheld and purified when mistakes are made, then they remain in that person's mental continuum until death. Um, but then day by day by day, we deepen, we train in refuge. And so, I mean, that has many parts. Recollecting the incredible aspects, of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That's part of training in refuge. Recollecting the powers of the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dharma, the qualities of the Sangha. And again, upholding the refuge commitments. I think all of the refuge commitments will be addressed before we get to the end of the chapter. But again, there's the 5 lay vows, but then there's also the refuge commitments, and there are 2 separate sets of vows. We talked about one being not to put worldly gods or other sources of refuge above the Buddha. That's one of the refuge commitments. So that's also the primary vehicle, is day by day understanding the commitments and vows and upholding the commitments and vows is another, is the, I would say, the main vehicle by which we train in refuge. But again, just even recollecting the all of the qualities, the incredible qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, is part of that process too. So it's kind, it's like with anything, it deepens over time, and the real essence of it isn't, as you're saying, isn't, I mean, it's incredibly important to have that first moment when we're adopting the vows, when now the vows are part of the mind. But then the hard work is every other day that follows after that, where we have to uphold the vows and the commitments, and we have to deepen and train in refuge. And that's a lifelong process of the realization of refuge becoming more and more real in the mind. And and again, we can gauge our process in that with respect to, when things get tough, where does our mind go? Where do we turn to our practice? Do we turn to our understanding of the teachings? Do we think, oh, I need to study more. Oh, I need to learn more. Oh, I need to, or do we think, oh, I need to watch a movie. Oh, I need to, tune things out. I need to distract myself. Do we, how do we react in difficult circumstances? Do we really think, is it really true in our mind, in our experience, that the Buddha, his teachings, and the community of practitioners who've realized his teachings are what holds us back from suffering? Or do we think that money and ice cream and power and status and reputation and comfort, that those are the things that really hold us back from suffering. Is that, which of those two things is really genuinely true in our mind? And again, it's not to beat ourselves up when we turn to those things, that's what the training in refuge over decades is about, is getting to a place where we spontaneously, deeply, genuinely relate to those sources of refuge as the ultimate source, which, as we said before, doesn't mean that we don't take any refuge in anything else. It just means we don't put it above refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So it's a mistake to think, oh, I'm not going to go to the doctor because I'm just going to pray about it. Like, Buddhism is not, Christian Science. It's not that. It doesn't have that view. But in Buddhism, we understand that we can get a surgery or we can take a drug, or because our bodies, are physical things, but they're manifesting a karma. And so, yes, it's true, you can remove cancer from the body through radiation and surgery and do that. Like, that's, you're probably not going to meditate away cancer. You might, some people probably can, some incredibly highly realized beings, because it is a karmic process, they probably can reverse that karma. But for almost anyone, once a karma has ripened, it's a karma that has ripened. And now we're stuck with it having ripened. So we do the worldly things, but we realize that I'm still subject to getting cancer again in my next life. I'm still subject to death in this life. I'm still subject to some other terrible illness later on in this life because I have ordinary aggregates, because I'm not enlightened. And so we take some degree of refuge in worldly things because there are benefits. If you need to talk to a therapist or you need to get a course of treatment, you do all of those things, but they cannot completely eliminate our susceptibility to illness, to anxiety, to depression, etc. Only the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can can provide the methods by which we are completely freed from being subject to those again and again and again in this and future lives. So we have to be realistic and balanced too, but it just means that we don't put an ultimate source of refuge above Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Okay, we are a little bit past time, so we'll leave it here for today. So we'll end with dedication. So I recollect our altruistic intention and think that having listened and contemplated, participated, we've actualized that intention, which has created positive energy in the mind. That positive energy will ripen in beneficial ways. So I try to visualize very clearly all of the incredibly vast beneficial results that we would like to flow from the ripening of that karma for the benefit of countless sentient beings. All right, so we will carry on Monday. Have a good weekend.